Welcome to the Impatient Entrepreneur Podcast, a show where we hear from entrepreneurs and business owners who are chomping at the bit to make their mark on the world. I'm your host, Lauren Quidar-Cockrell. Now, let's hurry up and get to the good stuff. Welcome back, everyone. I'm so honored to be joined by Alex Sanfilippo today. If you're a podcaster or have been a guest on podcasts, you may recognize his name as the founder of PodMatch, a really excellent software that I subscribe to and recommend all the time that matches podcast hosts and guests for interviews. I'm a huge fan of his business and his podcast called aptly Podcasting Made Simple. Alex, thank you so much for being here today.
Lauren, thank you so much for having me. Really excited about the time we're getting together.
Likewise. Yay. Okay. So we're going to have sort of a meta episode, I'm sure. But first things first, tell us a little bit about PodMatch and just kind of, like the brainchild that you had there and just such an amazing program that you have.
Yeah, sure. It goes back to 2020, a year that many of us remember. And right before the world shut down, I went to a conference. It was literally a week before I feel like everything shut down. I was at a conference with 2,000 people and I was speaking and it was all podcasters. And I got off stage, I asked people, what are you struggling with? And they all told me that they were having trouble finding guests for their show, or more accurately, having trouble finding the right guests for their show. And interestingly enough, there was people in there that were also authors saying, hey, I'd like to go on other shows as well. And I found myself there in real time, like connecting people, like, I just talked with somebody. Lauren would be a good fit for you to talk about this product or service that you have or book. Anyway, I went home knowing I wanted to do something in the podcasting space. And so long story short, what I came up with basically was thinking like, what if there was something that worked like a dating app, but instead of connecting people for dates, it connected them for podcast interviews, putting the guest and the host together so they can get in the recording studio virtually mostly, and they could actually have that time together. And that's exactly what we built with PodMatch, was just the whole idea is, can we just get really good about friction, like without any friction, putting those right people together that are just a good fit and kind of weed out the rest. And we've just been working on, since then, just working on improving that and also automating as much of the administration in between that we possibly can. We want to streamline the process so that there's just more time doing what you and I are doing right now, which is the fun part, right? Getting to have this conversation, having to be like, okay, I have to send an email after this, and then I need pictures, and I need this and this, right? Like, can we remove some of that friction that's involved and just make it a good time recording while putting the people together faster? And that's what we've been building, and launched in 2020 and have just been working for years now to really just improve it, make it better and better for the industry.
And it really, is a great program. I used it for myself as a guest long before I launched this podcast. And then we recommend it to our PR clients all the time too. But it has, and then becoming a podcast host, I thought, I'll put the podcast on there. We'll see what happens. But man, really able to screen out or find high quality guests. You've heard them if you listen to the show. And then there's monetization to it too, which is nice, both from an affiliate link perspective. And then, as I started hosting, all of a sudden it was like, oh, you have money in your account from hosting these wonderful people on your show. Like, how did you kind of figure out that monetization piece of it too?
Yeah, no one's ever asked me about this, which is interesting because I feel like that was like a big piece of it. So Lauren, thank you. I just realized that the creator economy in general, which is, for anyone who doesn't understand the definition, that's bloggers, YouTubers, people using social media as influencers, podcasters. Like, that's the creator economy, or creating digital content that ultimately serves somebody else. I realized that almost every company, I'm not trying to call anyone out, this is just kind of the culture of it, but almost every company expects to get something from the person who's creating and serving. And for me, I was just like, I wasn't sleeping well, if I can just be real. Like, it was bothering me. I'm like, man, I'm asking these people for money so they can go out there and serve people. And everyone wants their money, and they're just trying to pour out their heart and help somebody with what they have. And not everyone has like the help people mentality. Sometimes it's like, I need to turn a profit. But most people, even if they are in that boat, they're still like, hey, I'm going to make money, but I'm going to help somebody by doing that. And so for me, I was just like, man, there's got to be a way we can give back to the creators, and specifically the podcast host. Podcast guests are getting free access. Like today, I'm getting access to an incredible podcast that I listen to, right? Like, and so this is a great, like, a gift for me. So thank you again for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
A host has a lot of work to do after this. Like, this is a very small piece of what it takes. It's your platform. People are going to reach out to you about this episode. If they didn't like something I said, or if they really like something I said, they're going to reach out to you. And so you're responsible for the platform. And I was like, man, can we somehow help podcast hosts offset their production costs? So we just created a profit share program where basically we just cut our profit in half and said this half goes back to podcast hosts based off how often they're using the platform. I've had people be like, hey, I don't use PodMatch, but can I get in on that profit share? I'm like,
What?
no, there's millions of podcasters. We're not going to do very well. Like we're going to close our doors real fast. So basically, if you're using PodMatch, we just, anytime you're doing an interview, we put a little bit back into your account as the podcast host, just again, to really encourage, hey, let's keep on creating together because this is really serving the world.
I love, there's so much in there because this is not my bread and butter. This is not my main business. It's certainly a labor of love and is not monetized really at the minute. But to have a little bit come into the kitty at the end of the day is like, oh, okay, well, thanks. so thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing that up. Again, that's really kind of you to bring it up. But just no one talks about that. So I'm very thankful to hear that.
Well, cool. Well, I was curious about it. It's like all of a sudden it wasn't something that it wasn't a deciding factor in wanting to, have that dual guest host a subscription. I was just like, this is a great product. I want to use it. And then, here we go. Okay. So I have lots of questions, Alex, but I want to ask my first official one, which is, are you an impatient entrepreneur?
This is like the only place where I can say yes to this and feel okay about it. So yes, I am. Typically, I'm like kind of maybe, but yes, I am. An
affirmative. Yes. Wear it proudly. Yes, we're all like sort of asynchronous group therapy. Well, cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Welcome. And so, were you an entrepreneur prior to starting PodMatch?
Sort of. I started as an entrepreneur in like my early years, like even as a kid, had just an entrepreneurial mindset. I come from an entrepreneur family, but I ended up doing 15 years in big corporate. And that was between PodMatch and all the little side hustle things that I did before that throughout high school and all that. So I think it's always been there. And even when I was in corporate, now there's a coin that's been coined intrapreneur, which is just an entrepreneur working inside of an organization. I think it's what caused me to excel really far is I still had this ownership mentality, even though I wasn't an owner. And so I just kind of kept that mindset going. So internally, Alex Sanfilippo has always been an entrepreneur, but I did have a 15-year sprint where I was part of big corporate.
Okay. And so were you just called to podcasting? Was that a curiosity and a passion of yours? Like what was sort of the genesis beyond what you've already shared about the business start? Yeah,
at about year 13 of being in big corporate, I started getting the itch to do something different. And it was the aerospace industry. And before people think that's super interesting and fun, I was not an astronaut, skydiver, or fighter pilot. I worked behind a computer, manufacturing parts. And it was, I loved that career. But I just kind of hit this point where I realized, I'm like, man, I think I'm ready to do something else. So I went back to what I knew as an entrepreneur, which was side hustles. And so I just started trying a bunch of different things. I built some websites. I started speaking. I started doing a little bit of coaching, like just different things to kind of learn, hey, what is it that I like? And pretty much all those things failed really quick. But one thing that stuck with me is I decided to start a podcast. And I don't know, Lauren, if this was like genius or what this was, but I decided to start a podcast. I started to start this podcast to talk to people who had successfully left a 9-to-5 job to become a full-time entrepreneur. I wanted to learn for myself. It was kind of free coaching. And also I wanted to bring some other people along with me. And that show did really well. And ultimately, it's what made me realize that I want to be an entrepreneur. This is confirmed, but I wanted to be in podcasting. Like I actually learned that from doing a podcast, which was not the intent of doing one. It was just for me to learn. It was a cool medium to learn through. But then made me realize, I'm like, wait a minute, this is what I really like. So that's ultimately what brought me from where I was into where I am now.
Very cool. I imagine you have some stats sort of off the cuff a little bit as far as the industry. When I started my podcast, this one about a year ago, someone was like, oh, what? Yeah, that's exactly what we need, another podcast. I was like, dang. I feel like, all right, well, don't listen then.
Right? That's exactly it. Don't listen then if it's not for you.
Sorry, not sorry. But I think I heard something the other day that, it really still is an untapped market. Like you might feel like everybody and their dog has a podcast. If you got a microphone, you can spin one up. But then I'm forgetting the statistic, but maybe you can enlighten us, that it really is still on the rise.
Yeah, I actually pulled up a report that we have. And if anyone is interested in seeing the data, it's podmatch.com/report.
Cool.
We update it every month. So I'm going to read off current data. And what you just said is such an important point. Like everyone has a podcast. I think we have to consider what it means to have a podcast because people don't realize this, but there are hundreds of thousands of shows on Spotify that have one episode and the episode says, test, is this thing working? And just trying to see if I can figure out how to podcast. So do we call that a podcast? One episode that's 3 seconds long of someone saying that, like, are you now a podcaster? So the definition I think really matters, but I digress. But right now, as we're recording this, I'm looking at active versus inactive. Active means they have posted in the last I think it's like 35 days. Give people a little bit of grace if they miss. Like some people have like a monthly show, right? And so there's 410,000 active podcasts, and there's 3 million total. Just over 3 million total. And again, at podmatch.com/report will have the exact numbers. I'm kind of rounding, but it's only 13.4% of the total number is actually producing episodes right now. And out of all those, the likelihood of making it even past 8 episodes is less than 50%. So yes, there might be 400,000 active shows right now, but 50% of them will be gone after 8 episodes. So let's just say do one a week, 8 weeks, and then 50 episodes, which maybe you could say is a year if we're releasing a weekly show. You've only got a 12% chance of making it that far.
Wow.
And so it really, people are like, oh yeah, podcasting is a bit saturated. It really isn't. There's not many. What we really track is just the active interview-based shows that have reached a certain milestone. So we estimate internally at PodMatch, there's about 41,000 podcasts that we actually consider this is a real podcaster. And so that's really not that many when you think of all the different topics and niches that can be covered. Like there's many things people are like, I wish there was a podcast about this. And then you got someone else be like, oh, there's too many podcasts. But the reality is, there's still many things that are untapped. So that's a very high level perspective of the industry, but we're proud of the report because it's the only one that's really showing, hey, like this isn't really what people are making it out to be. And if you compare it to something like YouTube, where there's hundreds of millions of channels, or blogs where there's literally billions of people with blogs, it's a very small piece of the creator economy.
Well, take heart, friends. If you have a podcast on your minds, then now's the time. And check out PodMatch. Are you creating anything up your sleeve coming out maybe later this year that you're excited about or impatient about in particular?
Yeah, I've got 2. One's the impatient one, and one is just like I've just had to let it go, and I'm not impatient on that one. Right now, like getting our funnel really right is important to me. PodMatch is not for everybody, and I acknowledge that. We do have some educational resources that have historically been inside of PodMatch, but we're kind of flipping that on its head and allowing people to get access without being part of PodMatch, because again, it just isn't for everybody. And I acknowledge that. I have no problem with that at all, but we still want the education to be available for people. So we're kind of flipping our entire funnel, which is maybe it's become a bit of a dirty word in entrepreneurship. I don't mean anything like, we're not trying to sell you anything. We're just trying to get you the information you need as quickly as possible. So there's probably a better word I should be using. But I'm very impatient about this because I'm ready for it to be done, because I know that it will serve and help a lot of people that otherwise we will just never reach because we're just not really their people, but they'll really enjoy this completely free group of resources that will really help people a lot and help them find the result they're looking for on either side of the microphone as a podcaster, because we have the guest and the host. And so for me, like, I'm really excited about that coming down the pipeline. Like, I feel very good about the content we've written. It's being developed right now by my co-founder, Jesse, and he and I just have a lot of back and forth on like, oh, now I need this, now I need this. And I'm like, personally, really just ready for it to be out and done, because I know it's not serving anybody by being behind a closed door right now. So I'm excited for that to happen. So that's like one of the really quick things. What I'm excited about long term is the improvements that we're making in PodMatch. And as I mentioned earlier, streamlining processes, automating administration, these things are super important to us, along with helping people get more exposure. So we just released the first of a brand new profile for both for guest and for hosts that has a lot of SEO benefits, so search engine optimization benefits, where it'll actually help people start rank their own name, rank higher in search engines like Google, like Bing, and eventually help them earn like a knowledge panel where like if you type in a famous person's name You know how that shows up with like all these details about them. Some of it too much information for sure. We won't be going to that level, but we'd love for your picture to show up, your website to show up. And we're creating PodMatch in a way where we'll automatically help people do that just by having an account, that it'll start training search engines that this person is the authority with that name. And this is actually them. This is their data. And that's one of many examples of things that we're doing. Once again, can we streamline the process while really just maximizing the value? And I'm a little bit more patient on that because my attention's on like getting, again, really the way that we serve really aligned really well to the industry. And then after that, I might be impatient about the other part too.
Well, that's really exciting. Starting from the latter first, but I've noticed the profile changes that are happening, and so that's exciting, selfishly. But then on the knowledge base and the quote unquote funnel, which it is a funnel, being generous as a brand is an attribute and a great decision, but it takes a lot of work and resources to do that. But it makes me think of a HubSpot as a corollary. They put out quite a lot of quote unquote free content. And then, it is not for everybody, but you can certainly avail yourself of their resources. And then one day you might become a customer. But yeah, that's it's a big undertaking. So kudos to you. That'll be exciting to have out there as people educate themselves.
Yeah, thank you. And HubSpot, great example. That's one that I've learned from over the years. So that was like literally, they're like the golden standard. So we're working towards something that's more that vibe.
Cool. Well, we'll be sure to tell everybody about that when that's ready. So I know you listen to podcasts. Do you also read or listen to books? You mentioned you go to conferences. Like, what are some of the ways that you really fuel yourself as a leader? And then are there any that you feel particularly passionate about and want to share?
Yeah, this has evolved for me over the years. There was a long time where I only read physical books. Like that was it. And then I discovered podcasting and I started reading books and listening to podcasts. And typically I'd find the author and go listen to them as well. So it kind of like, it counteract with each other. But something I've really enjoyed doing more recently is because the search for podcasts are getting really good in Apple, Spotify, Amazon, like you can look things up pretty easily these days. Instead of looking for a specific show, I've been looking up specific topics that I want to grow in. And I've been just adding a bunch of them to my queue. So I'll listen to 10 to sometimes 20 podcast episodes about the same topic, all from different people, all different perspectives. So I can really learn a little bit more about it. And I've found that to be just extremely, extremely helpful. And also in more recent times, I've gotten really into audiobooks. I think it's because I started listening to more podcasts. I realized I really like the format. And I've never been the quickest reader. Like, so when I'm reading a physical paper, I'm a bit slower. I do retain really well, but I'm not very quick. But I found I retain just as well if I'm listening at like 1.5, sometimes 2x when it's an audiobook, especially if the author speaks a little slower versus the one actually doing the audiobook. And so I'm like, man, I'm actually getting through this a lot faster and I'm retaining it just as well. And so those are some of the ways I do that. And again, the big thing for me though is topical. Like I don't spend a lot of time like on more general business things. It's like, man, I really want to learn how to get faster at developing with my co-founder, right? Like how can I work better as a team and how can we just have better synergy to like figure out what's important, how to do that well. So I'll read a book about working remote together or about how to really build a stronger synergy between your team or release products faster. So like I'll go find something on that specific topic. So I basically keep like a small queue of the things I'm like, this is something that's like a pain point for me that I acknowledge that I want to learn on. So I've become very intentional with how I learn and it's paid dividends. It's been very, very helpful for me.
That is such a clever thing to do. You're right. The search has improved. I didn't necessarily notice that like at the front of my mind. It was passively seeing that search had evolved in Apple, which is what I use for my podcast listening usually. And but yeah, I'm going to try that because I have some shows that are my favorites, but then you kind of run out and then it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to listen to like a whole book on this. And but to be able to curate learning via just certain episodes, I love that. Cool. Thank you for that tip.
Yeah, of course.
And on audiobooks, I think some people sometimes poo-poo that's not reading or whatever. And I saw a meme the other day that was about like, you are discrediting thousands of years of oral history by saying audiobooks are not really like reading or learning. Like, oh, that's a good point. That is really how knowledge was passed for many years.
I've got many friends that are visually challenged and that's their only option for reading. So like, are they not reading? Because that's the way that they read, right? And so And for me, it's about how you retain the best. If I wasn't retaining any of it, I was just letting it play really fast. Like that's not anything. It's like, where are you retaining? And so for me, while I'm working out, listening to a book at 2x, I retain really well, and I'll pause it a lot, and I'll take notes and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm not going to discredit it. I think it's just a matter of what you enjoy, and I'm just thankful to live in a world where we have options because we all learn a little bit different.
Yeah, I actually, I was supposed to fly for a business trip this past weekend, and all the hubbub with flights being of issue, that was like, you know what, I'm just going to drive. And I've got lots of books stacked up here. I'm just going to chip away at this queue, and it was nice to just. But sometimes, like your brain can only take in so much. All of a sudden, I'm realizing I'm thinking more about my issue at hand versus when I'm listening. Like, okay, I better stop that.
Yeah,
just finishing it to finish it is not actually moving the needle here for me. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, you have this business since 2020 was an epic time to start one, although lots of people did start them at that time, but you've kept going, so congratulations. But in that time, has there been a moment where you felt like the rug just totally got pulled out from underneath you and you thought, oh, I do not know if we're going to survive this, but then ultimately it turned out to be one of the best things that could have happened?
Yeah, there's been a number of those. I think that as an entrepreneur, like as a founder, entrepreneur, like that's how it goes. And maybe not forever, like maybe at some point that stops, but for many of us, like we live in that world of, oh man, like I wasn't expecting this. And so, yeah, that happened a lot. And early on, I was seeking advice from anyone I could get advice from, which little advice is not really the best way to go because not everyone knows everything. And so I was listening to people that really had no business talking about a topic that wasn't their main topic, but they were successful in their lane, but they didn't know software specifically. And so I was getting ideas from people, and I was like, all right, well, let's develop it in this manner, in this way. And there was a couple things that we did that, I mean, it shut down our production pipelines, or actually like entire development, like just slowed down because it was such a big lift that had no return on investment. In fact, it was a negative return on investment. We finally released it. And that was early on. It was within our first year. We took like the second half of our first year in business to work on something that ended up being reversed almost immediately when we finished it because it created a bad experience for people using the software. We had good intent. The idea of it was good, but people just didn't want it. And so for me early on, like, I felt really defeated, and I felt like for a while, like there was probably a full year where I felt like my ideas were going to be bad ideas. Interestingly enough, PodMatch was my idea, and I'm very thankful for that. But like, I thought that was my one good idea, and the rest of this was just going to not be good. And so I was telling my wife, who's my business partner, and Jesse, who's my other co-founder, that the three of us are partners in this thing. I was like, hey, like, we got to start taking my ideas with like a grain of salt. Like, I don't think that my ideas are good anymore. Like, I think I had my good idea, and I don't think I have anymore. And so I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, and I became terrified of the people using our software because I'm like, man, I just can't take getting like beat up by these people anymore. And no one was beating me up. It was voiced that what we did wasn't good, and it was well-meaning. It didn't hurt anyone financially. It just made for a worse experience on the software itself. But I became very fragile, dealing with imposter syndrome, worried about my own ideas. And that was a really tough time for me. And it took a lot of self-reflection, sitting back. And then finally, like, what got me through it was what caused me to leave corporate and become a full-time entrepreneur, which was taking courage. And courage simply means being afraid than doing what you have to do anyway. And so for me, I started getting on calls with people who were happy, who were unhappy, just to learn. And so I got back in tune with the community, and then with myself as a creative, right? That not all my days are going to be bad just because this one was really bad and really wrong. And that was probably like the biggest moment for me that like I had to learn from. After that, there's been micro failures, but the thing is, we ship a lot faster now. We release updates, and if people don't like them, they don't serve. We typically can find out really quick and make changes. And so it's kind of like this weird thing of like, you're never on top of the mountain all the time. It's like mountain peaks and then valleys. It's like you're going up and down, up and down. And I don't say to be discouraged about entrepreneurship. As a matter of fact, I think in recent years, I've learned to really fall in love with that. That's part of the adventure of it, is that, hey, it's not always going to be super glamorous and great. Sometimes you got to get in the trenches again. It's going to be a little bit tough. People aren't going to like something. It's not going to work the way you thought it was going to. And I learned all that from that first year, like the second half of that first year, and then the next year of me healing, growing, figuring out how to really step into being a true founder entrepreneur.
Oof. It's like you're this baby entrepreneur, and just all of a sudden, it's like, and we have a lot of, natural hubris. Like we have this idea, like we love it, we're on our way, and then we get knocked off our pedestal a little bit. But it's important to have that moment, because I think it really is a healthy balance between, if you felt like everything you touch would turn to gold, then that would make you pretty insufferable.
Right. Yeah. Yep. We've all met that entrepreneur who pretends that that's them, but the reality is there's still something there for all of us. And I think that's a great lesson for listeners, is like, there's no one who's always gotten it all right. Like that's not the human condition. And you know what? Actually, it reminds me, if you don't mind,
Please.
There was a previous episode of your show that I really enjoyed, and I'm going to give the date, which I wrote down. Came out on 6/12/2024. It was titled "Being the Boss," and so I had to listen to it. Right? I mean, so and it was with Lindsay Epperly, and Lindsay said this line, like, because I was like, man, I've seen her business, like she's done incredible, and she basically was talking about, what does it look like to be gracious to the people that we serve? And I just was like, man, for someone who's like on top of the world, who could be full of pride, all this, right? Like, she still thinks that way. And then I listened to her journey, which was in that episode. And even someone who, like, from an outward person looking in, like I look at her business, I'm like, man, she's probably just always got it right. That is not the case, not even in recent years. And I'm not saying to put her down. It's just that truly is the journey. That's the adventure. And someone like that again, many of us are like, dang, she's perfect, right? Like, it's just not true. Like, she has the same struggles and stuff. So I think it's just such an important reminder that, like, hey, like, as an entrepreneur, like, this is what you're signing up for. You're going to go through it a little bit, but it is beautiful and it's worth it. And it serves people, as long as you can keep yourself going. Take courage and just keep on working on continuous improvement. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. It's, there are some moments where you're just like, okay, I'm done with my lessons now. This hurts too much.
Right.
I'm good. No more. But then I always feel so much stronger on the other side of that. There's so much growth and maturation that happens. And I think what you're alluding to here is also just, if we allow it, it also creates a lot of empathy and for the people we serve, and whether it's a customer or client or a team member. And I've said this a few times now, but being a business owner and entrepreneur has really allowed me to become the person I think I was meant to be. I think had I continued on working for someone else, I probably would have gotten smaller and smaller, rather than what has happened ultimately is that actualization as a person. It's exciting. It can be tough, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because I think that so many of us think we have to become an entrepreneur to step into ourselves fully. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, but also people who've worked corporate jobs. I've got siblings that are working corporate jobs and they thrive there, right? It's all personality. But if you're listening today and you're like, man, I think what Lauren's sharing is describing me, and I feel stuck, like, maybe it's time to get impatient and even becoming an entrepreneur. But if you're like, hey, I'm great in this corporate spot, be that entrepreneur, be that person that's working in an organization and just absolutely crushing it for that company. Again, I've got siblings that do that, and they do it really well, and they're super happy and they're thriving. And there's like, the whole thing is, there's not one size fits all. Like, it's gonna be different for each and every one of us.
And I love the idea of entrepreneurs, because my team is pretty much exclusively entrepreneurs, which I love. I love that. Thank you for wanting to work with me and for me, and making everything better. But not, you don't want to hang out your own shingle at the moment, at least. And I love that.
Yeah, me too.
It's hard to have a team if everyone wants to work for themselves.
True.
All right. So talking about baby Alex, and you having a business starting at 10 years old, was there a part of you growing up, or a personality trait where maybe people criticize it, maybe they didn't, but you may potentially felt like it was a weakness and maybe holding you back, but today as a leader and entrepreneur, you realize it was your superpower?
Yeah, I had some pretty bad learning, like pretty aggressive learning disabilities as a kid. And first off, like, I thank God that, like, I'm where I am today. I'm able to communicate well. I also thank God for my mom, who is truly a saint. I was homeschooled all the way through because I really struggled. Like, I had a really, really hard time. And it's not for lack of trying. It wasn't any of that. It was just like, it just didn't click. And the weird thing is, like, the worst subjects I had was anything involving speaking or writing or reading, right? And like, I'm in a space now where people are like, wow, you must have been really good at all this stuff. And the reality is I wasn't. But the way that really became a superpower for me, even as a kid, was learning to overcome obstacles. And so for me, like if you watch me write on a piece of paper, I still write my letters, my English letters, the alphabet incorrectly. Like it looks right, but if you watch how I write it, anytime someone sees it, like, what are you doing? I'm like, this is just how it has to work in my brain. I'm sorry. Right? Like not getting into it. This is just how I learned because it's the only way I could learn. But again, like what it really caused me to do is become resilient. And again, I thank my mother for that, helping me with that growing up, but also just like to overcome obstacles. And for me, I think ultimately what it taught me to do was to learn how to learn on my own. Because especially back then, like I'm not like super old or anything like that, right? But like back in my day, the tool set was very different. And because of that, like it was a lot of self-learning, self-starting. And I believe that's really helped me as an entrepreneur a lot, because when many people are like, I just don't know what to do, I can't figure this out. For me, that's where I start to even begin to thrive. It's like, okay, if we can't figure this out, that's perfect. That's a good spot. I've been here before. I know what to do when we can't figure it out. Like we're going to make something out of this. And so I think once again, like my whole childhood, like that was pretty like, that hurt. Like it was, I feel like I had a lot of fun as a kid. My parents were wonderful, have great siblings. But when it came to learning and stuff, like it was tough for me. Like I can remember it was like 18, felt like 18 years of pain before I got to like becoming who I was. But now I look back, I'm like, man, if I didn't go through all that struggle, like maybe I wouldn't be the leader that I am today. And so that's something that I think has really turned into a superpower for me.
Absolutely. I mean, gosh, resiliency in general, specifically, I mean, for anything in your life, but specifically when it comes to being an entrepreneur and business owner, you know, you watch people who like, this just is hard. I'm not going to do it anymore. Like, okay, well, what isn't hard? But you know, just to be like, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know how I'm going to get through this yet, but I am going to figure it out. I mean, what a gift that ultimately is. So kudos to your mom. I love stories especially when men are talking about their moms as children. I have a little boy, so I'm like, oh, hopefully he talks about me like that one day.
One day, you know, I've had the opportunity to keynote 2 separate times at women's conferences. I don't know why, but I'm the guy who's gotten picked. And both times I said something about my mom. And the second one I went to, I started bawling my eyes out from stage. I don't know what came over me. I'm not really much of a crier, but like I just lost it. And here's hundreds of women running around looking for tissues and stuff like that. I'm like, what? I'm never getting invited back. Like clearly I just made a mistake. But yeah, I'm very thankful, and I do always want to acknowledge my mom for just for what she put up with for a long time. So well, and your son will thank you one day as well. It just takes a little bit of time, I think.
Yeah, could be. Well, yes. Thanks, Mom. Thanks to my mom, who's an avid listener, and your mom as well. Okay, so as we get closer to wrapping up, what's a piece of advice you can give our listeners so they can make their lives and businesses stronger today?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to my years of having an entrepreneur interview-based podcast, learning to become an entrepreneur. I just occasionally like to share what I learned over 158 episodes. And I'm way simplifying what I learned, but basically to be a successful entrepreneur, I learned there's really 4 main steps. Number 1 is define an area that you're passionate about. Explore that area, dive into it, get into the culture of it. And when you get into the culture of it, step 2 is to really get into the community. Find other people that are also passionate, that are in it, that work in it, that live in it, whatever it might be, and have empathy toward those people. I mean, empathy truly is one of the ultimate superpowers, I feel. So if you're passionate about it, you're in the community, you're empathetic toward what they have going on, find a simple problem they're struggling with. And the key word there is simple. Like if you're an impatient entrepreneur, you want something simple to solve, because step 4 is to solve that problem as fast as you possibly can. And software, we call it MVP, minimum viable product. Just as simple, as small as you can to see if it works. And when we launched PodMatch, we followed that exact framework. I got into podcasting because I was passionate about it. I started speaking around the community, giving back wherever I could, really trying to help and serve. I asked them what they were struggling with. They told me, and the fastest possible solution was PodMatch. When we launched, we had no logo. I had typos everywhere. Every page took 10 seconds to load. And when I launched it, I said, does this work? And people were like, you should get a logo. I'm like, not what I asked. Does it work? Yes or no? If it works, then we'll consider a logo. And so I just want to encourage everyone with that. Like that framework will make your life and your business better if you can really apply those 4 things to anything you're doing. Even if it's not something for profit, if you just find out what your friends are struggling with and help them with it, like you will have a better life as a result, and you will just feel more fulfilled. And so for me, that's what I'd really leave you with on this point.
I love that you went ugly early, you know, just get it out the door. I I really struggle when people let that perfect be the enemy of the good. Just like, just try it. We can fix it later. It's a digital world. Let's rock and roll here, So that's beautiful advice. Thank you. Okay, Alex, you've been such a gracious guest. I'm so glad you came today. Where can people find you?
Yeah, typically I have a different call to action, but I want one specific because many of the listeners won't know this, but Lauren has been on my podcast, which was like a total dream. And so I'm just going to call out that episode. If you're at all interested in podcasting, you are podcasting as a host or as a guest, this will be interesting to you. If not, when you go to this page, you can find everything else I do as well. The links are everywhere on that page, but it's podmatch.com/EP/285. podmatch.com/EP/285. And that's actually Lauren just giving some incredible wisdom in the space. And you really are a true expert. So that's where I'd like people to go after this.
Okay, we'll put it in the show notes. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thanks for listening to The Impatient Entrepreneur. Love the podcast? Be sure to share it with a friend or colleague and give us a 5-star review. You can also chat with us on Instagram or Facebook at The Impatient Entrepreneur Pod. Want to star on a feature episode? Head over to theimpatiententrepreneur.com to inquire. Thank you to the team at Quidar & Co. for believing in me and bringing this podcast to life. And thank you to Carson Childers for mixing and editing this episode. I can't wait to see you next time.